Well, a news poll in The Australian today shows that voters are losing trust in the Albanese government as Labor's vote slips. Labor dropped 1 point to 32%, while the coalition lifted theirs to 37%. This is the government's worst result since November, and things aren't looking any better in the Sydney Morning Herald's Resolve poll, which was published just this evening, with Albanese's net performance rating dropping from -6 to -11. Meanwhile, Peter Dutton's personal performance rating increased slightly from -11 to -9. Our Political Insiders panel, former Chief of Staff to Opposition Leader Bill Shorten and former Press Secretary to Scott Morrison, Andrew Carswell and Cameron Milner, join me now. Welcome to you both. Look, Andrew, if this result is repeated at the election, Albanese would still win, but it's likely he'd be looking at a minority government.
Yeah, Sharri, we're certainly sliding towards a pretty unholy and unruly minority government of Labor, Greens and Teals and whoever else they can cobble together. That is the reality of where we're heading, and the Australians Dennis Shanahan made that very clear today in suggesting that history is against the Albanese government in the first place anyway. No government since the Second World War has increased their margin from the first term to second term. So minority government, lock it in, strap yourself in, it's going to get ugly. On the personal side, though, that Albanese's personal ratings are just kind of clinging on, and you get the sense that that there is this kind of stubborn perception from those that are not really engaged with politics and certainly don't spend any time up here, that Albanese is somehow a good bloke. There is still that. Anyone that's watched any focus groups in the last couple of weeks will know that perception is there. And it's slowly being eroded, but it's still there. And the coalition really has that as their target, if they really want to bring the Albanese government down, is to bring this guy's stubborn popularity down. That is the target. And you just get the sense that Albanese is one step, one mistake, one scandal away from the public going, doesn't matter if we think you're a good bloke, we need you to be a better Prime Minister.
Cameron Milner, what do you think about this? I mean, look, it might surprise you to hear me say it, but I think Albanese actually is a good bloke. The issue is that he's running this socialist left agenda, that he's abandoned the Jewish community, that he's been weak on border security. I mean, I don't want to run through every single scandal and failing here, but
there's a long list, isn't there, Sharri?
A long list, and for most people, it's that he hasn't addressed the cost of living crisis. He promised, that was his main election pledge before the federal election, that life would be more affordable, and in fact, it's far less affordable.
Well, you can be a good bloke and a terrible Prime Minister, and I think Albanese is proving that. I mean, these are dreadful numbers for Labor. We're a first-term government up against Peter Dutton and a ramshackle group of coalition people who were smashed the last election, and yet we're looking like minority government. I agree with you, Andrew. I think the disaster of a Greens-Teal-Albo alliance would be the worst possible outcome for Australia, and that's what Albanese seems to be happy with, because for Albanese, it's not about Labor government. It's about him being Prime Minister. It's all about the selfie. It's not about the substance. So that's what we're dealing with. And I think what the numbers show, for those who are engaged, Andrew, is that people don't like liars. People don't like the Prime Minister lying about what he said before the election and what he did after the election. And also demonstrates that Dunkley was a chimera. Like, it was a bonfire of the vanities for the moment to win a by-election, to scrape home a win. It wasn't about winning the next election, and it certainly wasn't about majority government.
I mean, for someone who said, my word is my bond, he has broken a promise so many times. And Andrew Carswell, the lesson that Labor has taken from the broken promise on stage 3 tax cuts is that it was a genius move that they're likely to repeat again with other more radical reforms.
Well, they would do anything they can to remain in power, and values just go out the window when you are trying to maintain power. And over the next 6 months, they've got to do a really ugly dance with the Greens and the crossbench on a number of different environmental reforms. You wait till they throw out their values and what they've stood for decades, just to stay in power, just to stave off the inevitable decline here. They'll do anything they can to remain in power.
Well, Kevin Rudd, it's been revealed by Christopher Daw on the Nightly that he's about to lose one of his top diplomats in Washington, D.C. He reports that the Deputy Head of Mission, Paul Myler, is leaving his post imminently. There's all the denials that, there's been no falling out between the pair at all. Cameron, what do you think about this? This is going to be a loss to Team Rudd.
Look, I think Kevin is quite capable of being the great ambassador for Australia that he actually is. I think last week was a storm in a teacup. You had Nigel Farage talking to Trump and trying to get a headline out of a piece of news on GB News. So look, my view is very different. I think Kevin's doing a great job as the ambassador for Australia. I think Kevin's enemies love to see him stumble, but I actually think he's doing a great job and will do a great job whoever the president, whether it's Biden or Trump, going forward, because he'll be Australia's representative.
Look, I think he's going to struggle under Trump if Trump gets back in, and many of his inner circle have made that clear even before the Farage interview. I've played you the comments that Steve Bannon made on my show just last month. But talking of Rudd's history of insults, have a listen to what Labor MP Jenny George, who spoke to Ben Fordham this morning, said about Rudd.
Kevin Rudd said you had no merit to keep your job as Parliamentary Secretary. This is because you had concerns about Kevin Rudd's carbon pollution reduction scheme. How did you respond to him when he said that to you?
The only reason I was ever told was by the leader then, Kevin Rudd, who told me, well, Jenny, you're not going to be a Parliamentary Secretary because you don't have merit. And I thought, well, how am I going to respond to this? I mean, this was on the phone. He didn't even say it to me to my face. And I had just been elected by the voters in Throsby with a 65% primary vote.
I mean, Andrew, this is Jenny George, who is a senior Labor female inside the party, senior union official, highly talented, very smart. She regularly watches this program, so we can only say nice things about her, but we would anyway. But look, this is just how Rudd treated women within his own team.
Yeah, well, Jenny's been on the right side of history in regards to that Labor policy. In terms of Rudd's emissions policy, she was on the right side of that, and she was proven correct in pushing back against that policy. But she's also on the right side of pushing back against the current Labor energy and climate policy, which is becoming a disaster more and more by the day. Particularly her issue with the renewable energy target, which is excessive. I mean, every major country in Europe is starting to walk away from their RETs at the moment because they are quickly realising that they can't provide reliable and affordable energy with 100% renewable energy. France has dropped theirs. Sweden has included nuclear energy in their RET as well, so they only need solar and wind to get to 70%. So the rest of the world is starting to walk away and getting sceptical of these high targets, and we are actually going the other way. We're locking in our targets. And the bad thing about excessive targets, you've got to go and reach them, right? So you put disastrous policies, fast and hard policies in place to reach them because it's all about the target and not about reliable and affordable energy.
I mean, Cameron, it does seem like Chris Bowen is realising he might have gone too far with his high fuel efficiency standard for petrol cars, though.
Look, I think that's right, and I think that's the sort of reality of the situation. If we're not manufacturing cars in Australia, we are going to have to be on international standards. And if the US is the largest auto market in the world, has set a benchmark that still reduces carbon pollution, let's not forget that. But that actually makes sense. And I've always found Chris a pretty logical person, despite some comments and commentary about him. Very logical person, very straightforward person, and actually wanting to achieve a good policy outcome and balance. And on the car stuff, he's arrived at the right place.
Cameron, you seem to have had a change in tune tonight. We haven't heard any criticisms from you of Labor tonight. Maybe you're saving it up for your column later in the week. All right, Cameron Milner, Andrew Carswell, thank you both so much for joining me.